to the Sustaining Creativity podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Allegra Stein, coach, teacher, and mentor. Please enjoy Allegra Stein. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity podcast. That's the word I was missing. Today, I am here with Allegra Stein. I'm super excited to chat about all of the things that she does, mentoring new coaches, teaching. She's a coach herself, and I can't wait to dive into how she uses creativity in all of these things with new coaches. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be having this conversation.
I am super excited to have this conversation with you as well. But before we dive into the meandering creativity that I'm sure we'll get to, why don't you just take a couple of minutes and let our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
My name is Allegra. I live in the Hudson Valley of New York. And since my background is very varied, I've done and tried a lot of different things, but I've been certified as a coach for almost a decade now. Nice. And for the first 7 or 8 years, I was really out there just experimenting with lots of different kinds of coaching projects and experiences and trying to manage the voices in my head that were telling me that there was like a right way to do it. And I needed to fit a particular mold. And like, if I could just figure it out, that everything would be fine. And a couple of years ago, I went through this certification. And as part of that certification, I learned what some of my strengths are, what my top strengths are. And not only taking that assessment, but really applying it to my work and understanding it just changed completely how I approach my practice. And as a result, on the far end of that, I started talking to other coaches and really kind of immersing myself back into the world of being a new coach, particularly in those first few years. And it was like this light bulb went off that I just wanted to try and inject a new way of looking at coaching and connect coaches to their individual strengths and values and interests and skills and help them carve their own path through the coaching landscape, because it is the Wild West out there.
Oh, yes.
And there is a very loud narrative. I call it the coaching industrial complex that I find is built around urgency and proven systems that aren't really the right fit for everybody. And so these days, and for the past few years, I've been mentoring and teaching and coaching other coaches, particularly coaches kind of in the first year or two of their practice, to embrace a more experimental and fun and aligned way of figuring this industry out, because it's a squirrely one, I've been saying lately.
It is. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's so exciting. And what a gift to be able to help people in those early times sift through and sort things out and play and have fun, because I know it can be very overwhelming when you are entering into a new industry or a new phase of life. And to have fun in that, I think, is so important. And it sounds like you share that with me.
I just find when things are fun, they just happen more easily. So
yeah, little sidebar. Actually, they did a study that if you learn something through play, you only have to do it like 10 times as opposed to the like 33 times that it would take for your system to learn something new. So
that's fascinating. I love that. That's great.
I use that a lot. Like, figure out how to play with it and you'll remember how to do it and integrate it into your system that much faster.
Yeah.
So speaking of play and creativity, what does it mean to you to be creative?
So creativity for me is very tied to how much I value like the spirit of adventure. There's, I think to be creative oftentimes means to try something without knowing how it's going to turn out. I think it means saying yes to ideas that on the surface might feel like, where did that come from? And a lot of times I'll see people have an idea and then immediately follow it with like, well, but what if, and I can't do that. And like all of the pieces of executing that idea get very structured and like, there's a lot of rigor and like, there's some constraint there. So creativity to me is it's a very spacious, open, which is the same as spacious. The word messy is coming up for me, but messy in a very like in that way that kids play in the mud. So it's like a generative messiness, and it's an alternative way of expressing oneself. And in coaching in particular, I think being a coach and having a coaching practice is one of the most creative industries we can be in because there is no one right way to do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to inject a lot more creativity into the art and craft, not only of coaching, but of like, again, running our own coaching gig, which they're kind of two separate things.
Right.
And kind of saying, well, what if we did it differently? Like, what if your coaching offer didn't have to look like, 3 Zoom sessions, but instead could look like, going on a walk in the woods and, and then taking a motorcycle ride together and talking about it at the end of the day. Like, and those kinds of helping coaches get more creative around like the coaching projects they create and the marketing projects that they have to do if they've got their own practice is just, it's one of my missions right now.
I love all of that. I love the piece of doing something without knowing the outcome.
Yeah.
That uncertainty. I'm so curious when people bring up uncertainty, how do you navigate uncertainty, or where did you learn to navigate uncertainty?
I don't know. I mean, I try and have a spirit of, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's start anyway.
Yeah.
Or I don't know what's going to happen. Let's go find out. So in my own life, I mentioned when we first hopped on, I made this decision in college to join the Peace Corps. And it was a pretty big decision for me, but it was a pivotal one because I knew it was time to leave something, though I couldn't put my finger on what. I just knew that for my own self, I'm like, I need to go do this thing. But other than just like the general architecture of being in the Peace Corps, I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. But there was an energy in that I now define as like adventure and curiosity. And it shaped me in ways I never could have expected. And I try and carry that into, I use strengths a lot in my work. I'm certified in a tool that uses strengths. I love leading coaches through their strengths. Everybody really, I love it as a tool. And I'm very high in ideator and activator. And so I just enjoy learning through doing. And I also try and challenge people when they're trying to predict the future. I do love doing that. When someone's like, well, but what if no one comes to my workshop? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's go find out, because maybe they won't. And even if they don't, you're going to know you're going to know what to do in that moment. So let's just go. So that all of those things kind of play a role in
nice
in my work.
Yeah. Just like that permission to try and have it not work and still be okay and learn something. And the curiosity and adventure, those 2 words really stand out to me. is that something, like, how have you continued to cultivate curiosity and adventure in your own life as you've gotten older? Because I think as kids, we have a lot of curiosity, we have a lot of adventures, but as we get into adulthood, not everyone continues to carry that through.
Yeah, I think so. My particular circumstances, I have two kids. They're now 13 and 11.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, a lot of my adventurous energy was kind of played out through geography.
Okay.
For my 20s. And, you know, it was all about going somewhere new. So I was in Bulgaria, and then I was in LA, and then I was in New York, and like just moving around was how I kind of expressed that and lived that out. And then once I was in New York, it kind of showed up in my career choices. So I spent 2 years teaching in the Bronx, and then I spent 2 years teaching in New Rochelle. And then at that point, I retired to have my kids. And after having my kids, I made this choice really to commit to some geographical stability, right? I for me personally, and this isn't universal, obviously, a lot of people travel and go.
Yeah.
Taking all of our circumstances into account, I was like, okay, we're just going to be here for a bit. And what happened was that I found after a period of time that drive to express myself and try something new just started to surface. So my very first project, actually, and I'm just remembering this now, was I opened up an Etsy shop.
Oh.
And I opened up an Etsy shop sewing little pouches. That was like my thing, is I set my sewing machine up and I got all these fabrics and I learned how to sew cool lined pouches, and I started to make these little pouches. And that was kind of my way of diving into this creative kind of unknown channel.
Yeah.
Without really knowing what I was doing.
The adventurous spirit of it. Yeah.
And then that carried over into my decision to get certified as a coach. And I have found that spirit of adventure has played out in my coaching practice, because I'm always like, let me try something new. What about this? I mean, it's happening today. I mean, I'm actively like, have a new idea, and I'm trying to build the page out, and I'm going over on Instagram and sharing live stories about it. And I don't know what's going to happen with it.
Yeah.
I think I know, but it's very iterative and kind of spontaneous.
I love it. I mean, the word adventure and how it began geographically and then turned into more career adventure. And yeah, I think we as people forget how we can still hold on to that adventure energy, even when it's not the physical adventure of like, I'm going on a huge trip, and that is the only version of adventure that you can participate in. So thank you so much for bringing more options of adventure to this conversation.
I'm glad if it did.
Yeah, it makes me think of my own experience of like, yeah, what are the adventures that I am on in my own life that aren't, what I may consider like outdoor adventure or, those kinds of things. Yeah. Well, you talked briefly about like some of the, your first Etsy shop, but when you think about maybe further back, what's your earliest memory of being creative?
It might be, I don't know if this is the earliest one, but it's just like bubbling up. I remember designing. I mean, I grew up when like Babysitter Club books were just out. And so I loved the Babysitter Club books. And I just remember, I don't know if this is true for a lot of people, but I just remember the energy of wanting to design a club.
Oh yeah.
Like, let's make a club. And the club never came to light. It was designing the club that was super fun. Yeah. And you'd have like a best friend over or something, and you'd get out a piece of paper. You'd be like, all right, who's going to be the president of the club and who's going to be the vice president and what are we going to do? And what are the dues going to be? So as I was thinking about that, I'm like, yeah, that was a very like creative exercise, was just coming up with this club that I was going to start and getting it down on paper. I just remember sitting out on my porch, you know, with a friend, coming up with the idea for this club. So that's one that kind of came up for me.
I love that. I too recall the club creating energy and experience. And maybe you didn't write it down, but like, there was a lot of like, oh, we could do this. It was just that imagination and the play and the collaboration that would happen and go into it. So I love all of that. And it sounds like you still do that today with
I guess I kind of do. I'm like, let's make a club, everybody. I bet your listeners, I'd be so curious for the people who are listening, how many of them are like, oh yeah, I totally designed a club in my mind too. I want to know, please let us know.
Comment
if you too were a club creator in your formative years.
Yeah, we'll have to for sure put that out and make sure people respond to that. I mean, you strike me as someone who uses a lot of creativity in your day-to-day life and in your career. But when you think of some of the challenges that you face in your everyday life, how have you used creativity to solve those challenges?
How have I used creativity to solve the challenges of my everyday life? Well, I mean, my brain is going to like, I think fiber arts are a great form of creativity. I think they're just so tangible. And so I really enjoy sewing and I enjoy knitting and crocheting. It comes in kind of waves.
Yeah.
But those practices kind of help me if I'm feeling too connected or overwhelmed, or I just need to focus in on a particular project that's going to create a tangible result. So that's one of the ways. I don't know how this dovetails. I'd be curious your thoughts on it, but I love reading. And I'm like, how are reading and creativity, you know, what's the crossover there? But that has become a very important like habit for me. And I'm part of a book club that I started last year, and like
starting a club. What?
Yeah. I started a club. You're absolutely right.
Love it.
I never made that connection and it just happened. It's great. So I guess I turn it over. Like, how have you found, are you a reader? Like, have you spoken with other creatives who cite reading as part of their process? What's your take on it?
Yeah. I mean, reading is absolutely a creative expression. Stuart Brown, who is kind of the grandfather of play, he breaks play into 7 types of play, and reading kind of falls under that imaginative fantasy play, because we're really taken into another world through reading, regardless of like the genre of book we're reading, but we're allowing our brain to create and imagine and have picture and imagery come up while we're reading. So it is a form of play. And I think oftentimes people get pretty narrow in their view of play, of like, play can only be this. Or if you were the kid who never wanted to go outside, all you wanted to do was read, and parents were like, get outside and play. But for you, like getting lost in a book is play. So
that's great.
I do believe reading is play, and I love to read, and I love to create my own world and get sucked into whatever world the characters are in. So
that's awesome. Have you read, do I have it? Sorry, I don't want to put too much. Have you read this book? Sorry, I just grabbed a book from my bookshelf. Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon.
I have read that book.
Yeah, this is as you were talking, I was like, this is a perfect kind of bridge between reading and creativity, because he talks so much about where to get ideas, and and I find this really kickstarted when I think about some of the lessons from this book, it very much reminds me about how reading a book can fire, like ignite creativity in certain ways.
Yeah, it inspires so many other ideas. And that Steal Like an Artist, I just posted something the other day on Instagram about you can mimic a result, but the creativity it took to get there, you can't. Like, that's your own.
I love it.
And so being able to, when we're just starting out, mimicking, or it's not plagiarism, but practicing what someone else is doing can actually help us experience that process until we can start internalizing that process for ourselves. So I think Steal Like an Artist, so important. Mimic people. That is really important, particularly when it comes to creativity in adulthood, because it's oftentimes we're so far removed from it.
Yeah. I've read with just following up on that, Oliver Burkeman is another author whose work I've been reading lately. He 2 books, The Antidote to Happiness and 4,000 Weeks. They're both really, really good. And I forget which one it was in, but he talks about this idea and the way he puts it, and I forget who he learned it from, but that originality follows unoriginality.
Yes.
And it piggybacks on what you were sharing about, like, actually the first steps in any project are to mimic. And I love how you use that word of like mimic what others are doing, because it's through it's like reading a recipe on a path to learning how to cook.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of pressure to come up with original work before we've even practiced doing what has worked for others, because I don't know why, because there's urgency and because we think that's the only way, and that it's only worthy if it's never been done before. And so I listen often and try and reteach those ideas of this, stealing like an artist, mimicking the originality follows unoriginality, to really give people and coaches permission to kind of practice what's been done before, because that is the way to figure
find
out your own voice.
Right, exactly. And then share your own voice. I think our Western culture and society really values the expert and not the word is
the learner, maybe.
Yeah, the learner, but someone who's not the professional, the amateur. You don't have to be the professional to still love doing it. You can be an amateur cook. You don't have to be a professional cook to still be good at it or still share it with other people. So the really valuing, what am I an amateur at? I don't have to be a professional or an expert in every area of my life. But I think we have a lot of pressure to be the expert. And if you're not the expert, then what are you?
It's an important distinction for sure.
Yeah. So I love these. I love how these conversations go and what comes up. It's so creative and spectacular. Well, I imagine often you come across people who do not feel creative or don't think they're creative. How do you work with someone in that, or how would you encourage others to find creativity in their life?
I think it's important first for people to define creativity on their own terms. So that's always interesting for me when I'm not creative. I'd be like, well, what is creative? What do you mean? It's definitely like a buzzword that can carry a lot of implication and weight without really saying, but what does it mean when you say I'm not creative? Right. And I think sometimes that exercise alone can start to tease apart that knot. Is looking at what the definition is and perhaps actually, playing with that and massaging it a bit to crack open this possibility. Like, well, actually, I am actually some of those things. And that moment alone can really cascade into a new sense of kind of self-belief and direction.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. Anyone who's like, but I'm not creative, I'd say, what do you mean by creative? I also think it's really helpful to invite people to look at things that they have already created that maybe weren't there before. So let's say someone is really good at budgeting, right? Math, numbers, strategy. And this is this is just like an example I'm pulling out. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that math and strategy, but let's say someone is like, well, I like building budgets. That's not very creative. I think it'd be really cool to ask that person, be like, well, what you just put together there, like that sheet of numbers and the relationship between all of them
Mhm.
didn't really exist before you did it. Is that not an act of creation? I think that could be really fun too, is have people seek out examples
Yeah.
of what they just described as being creative or creativity. And again, just one moment of that is enough to
Mhm.
kind of crack that nut and just be like, oh, well, I don't know, maybe I'm a little creative. And then it's like you're off to the races.
Right. All you need is a little.
All you need is a little. It's like a one drop over time fills a bucket.
Exactly. So true. No, I love that. I love the looking at your life and the things that you have already created that you may not have classified as, oh, that was creative, because it's something that comes easy to you, or that you do, or
Yeah.
your definition of creativity is performing arts or fine arts.
Mhm.
And that's not budgeting. But how do we expand the view of what creativity is? And it sounds like you're really inviting people to expand their idea and incorporate more
Yeah.
opportunities into their life.
I have a
Nice.
friend who loves making Google spreadsheets. And when I watch, if you've ever watched someone like create a spreadsheet,
Mhm.
like live, like maybe they're sharing their screen or they're helping you create a spreadsheet and they're just like organizing stuff, it is truly an art form.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet I think you hit the nail on the head, is that it tends to be creativity, I think often is positioned around, again, the visual arts and I think it's neat to disrupt that.
I agree. We should disrupt it. Getting dressed is a creative expression, and cooking and driving. And,
So great. I love it.
How do you get to incorporate more of it into your life? And I like to say creativity is a muscle that if you want to have it available, you have to flex it and use it. And the more you do, the easier it is to access. So,
yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a treat to chat with you. I just have one last question.
Sure.
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
It feels very action driven. It's almost like, and again, this is where creativity kind of marries with my natural talents of ideating and activating, that I know I've landed on something that I want to do when I start doing it. And so there's like this external expression of it. And like I said, today is a prime example of that happening. Like I had an idea this morning and I was like, I have to do this. Yeah. And so I just started doing it. And so it's a very like present moment, bringing something to life that I don't know, that started as this spark in my imagination. And I'm like, I'm just going to try this. What if I just put this word here? And, oh, what's the very next step? And so there's this kind of, here's another term that means different things to different people, but it's like this little flow state gets entered where I just keep kind of doing stuff until I look behind me and I'm like, oh, I did that, So there's a movement to creativity for me. Yeah.
I love
it's
that.
Usually an indicator that I'm in the middle of something, even if I'm not exactly sure how it's going to turn out.
It's so great to know that like movement is a big part of being creative for you.
Just doing something.
Yeah.
Just do something.
Getting it out, externalizing the internal experience.
Yeah. That's it.
I love it. Nice. Well, if people want to learn more about the things that you do, how could they go about doing that?
My website is allegrastein.com. They can find me there. I also lately have been really enjoying showing up on Instagram more, and that my name there is Misfit to Maverick.
Cool.
Nice. To the word to, not the number 2. That's the name of the community that I run for coaches. And yeah, lately I've just been playing more with kind of popping on there with ideas and suggestions. And so that's another place to come say hi.
Fun. I will put those links in show notes so it's easy to find you. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I have thoroughly enjoyed this today.
Thank you for having me. It means a lot that we were able to have this time.
Me too. Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.